Thanks for coming to tonight's panel. Take a second to silence your cell phones and grab a comfy seat. My name is Ed Battistella. It's my privilege this year to be the president of the Friends of Hannon Library. And soon I'll turn the panel over to our moderator, but I just want to encourage everyone to, tell everyone about the Hannon Library and remind people that it's open to the public and it's a resource for the entire community. And if you're not already a member, I hope you'll consider joining the Friends. This is our 50th year, so we've been around as long as Saturday Night Live. and arguably have better programming. I don't know. I want to begin with our SOU land acknowledgement, which is our tradition. So we want to take this moment to acknowledge that Southern Oregon University is located within the ancestral homelands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Lagawa peoples who lived here since time immemorial. These tribes were displaced during rapid Euro-American colonization, the gold rush, and the armed conflict between 1851 and 1856. In the 1950s, discovery of gold and settlement brought thousands of Euro-Americans to their lands, leading to warfare, epidemics, starvation, and villages being burned. In 1853, the first of several treaties were signed, confederating these tribes and others together, who would then be referred to as the Rogue River Tribe. These treaties ceded most of their homelands to the United States, and in return, they were guaranteed a permanent homeland reserved for them. At the end of the Rogue River Wars, in 1856, these tribes and many other tribes from Western Oregon were removed to the Siletz Reservation and the Grand Ronde Reservation. Today, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians are living descendants of the Takelma, Shasta, and Lagawas people in this area. We encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on and to join us in advocating for the inherent sovereignty of Indigenous people. And now, with no further ado, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Tony Davis, a computational linguist, who's going to moderate today's panel.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you all for coming. Nice to see so many people here. And today we're going to talk about misinformation and disinformation because we're in an academic setting, maybe with a bit of emphasis on those things within an academic context, but I'm sure we'll stray into broader realms too. I'll start by introducing our panel. There are two joining by Zoom. Present to my left is Melissa Anderson, who holds a doctorate in comparative literature and a master's in library and information science. And her research and publications cover topics like pedagogy, information literacy, history of science, and in 19th century literature. She's currently working on a book on reading and information literacy. And at SOU, she teaches classes covering a variety of information and research-related topics, such as information, science, and society, and also a class on Jane Austen in the 21st century. As I mentioned, our other two panelists are joining us remotely. Stacy Wedleg, there on the left of your screen, is a research scientist at the University of Washington's Information School's Technology and Social Change Group. And her research focuses on how libraries and organizations support community technology access and digital and information literacies. Before coming to the Information School, she taught adult basic computer classes with Seattle-based and international organizations. And then on the upper right of your screen, I'm pleased to welcome Elizabeth Ramsey, an associate professor and librarian at Boise State University, the Albertsons Library there. Her research focuses primarily on library contributions to student success and disinformation as an aspect of radicalization. In 2023 and 24, she was on a Boise State team that was awarded a targeted violence and terrorism prevention grant by Homeland Security to tackle disinformation as an aspect of recruitment and incitement to violence by hate groups. In 2024-2025, she was a research associate at University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Center for Information Technology and Public Life. She's carrying on her work to help strengthen our community's resistance to false and misleading information. So with that, I will just say a few words about our topic, and then I have a series of questions for our panelists that I hope their responses will provide some insight and enlightenment on these topics. We all know that more and more there's a landscape that all of us, researchers, students, citizens in general, face of incomplete, incorrect, untrustworthy information. Now, this isn't exactly something that just started yesterday. Propaganda and fake news, planted stories, to say nothing of advertising, go back a long, long ways. But these days, it seems to permeate so many aspects of our lives. And the creation of misinformation, disinformation is now hugely amplified by social media and by, last few years, AI tools. So how do we establish trust in information sources in an age where technology has dramatically altered both how information is produced and our interactions with it? And just to get things started, a couple of things you might think about. This, again, is in an academic context. And the source for this statistic is a website called Retraction Watch, which states that around 55,000 scholarly papers have been retracted to date for a variety of reasons, of course. Sometimes the science just turns out to be messed up, but sometimes it's more insidious and less, more malign motives. Scientists and companies who screen the scientific literature for telltale signs of fraud estimate that there are many, many more fake papers circulating, possibly as many as several 100,000. There's a source for that from a paper that showed up in Nature that hasn't been retracted yet, called "How Big is Science's Fake Paper Problem?" This fake research can confound legitimate researchers who have to then wade through lots of technical issues, equations, evidence, images, methodologies, only to find that they were made up. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists, and I have several questions for them. This first one, of course, is rather general. I'll start with you, Melissa. Tell us about what sorts of issues arise for librarians and academic institutions regarding the detection of unreliable information.
Yeah, so I can really only speak to our context here at Southern Oregon University, but I assume you mean for our students, right?
And faculty.
And faculty too, okay. Well, I would say first, I think the students face a lot of the same issues that the general public faces, and that, they're surrounded by information sources of varying quality, and they don't always know what questions to ask about the things that they're finding. A lot of it, they seem to just kind of take at face value, whether it's things that they find in the library or things that they find on the internet. In the past, we've always told them if they restrict themselves to library resources, they can avoid a lot of those problems. But even that's not always true, because the databases contain, a variety of types of information. And so sometimes even in our own sources, there can be problematic information. And also, there's even things that were considered good at one time, just like you said, the retracted papers, sometimes they'll come across things that they need to do a little more research on. What have people said since something's been found? So it's really a lot of the same problems that the general public would face, except that I would say our students a lot of times don't know what questions they should be asking about information that they find online or are told from a potentially unreliable source. And that's kind of our job, is to teach them what kinds of questions they should be asking and how they should be thinking about information, how they should be thinking about the sources that are out there. Because we can't there's no way to screen them from all bad information, but we can teach them how to think about it in ways that'll be more helpful to them. I'm really curious about what some of our other panelists would say, what they've seen at their institutions.
Yeah, so go ahead, Stacy, and tell us what issues arise for you at University of Washington, with detecting unreliable information and strategies for addressing that.
Sure. So I think that just the fundamental problem that we are all facing is that we are just constantly under this deluge of information. And that, it really is overwhelming, and it's weird not we not a it's just not humanly possible to kind of to actually be able to sift through everything and to kind of, and I think that that's one of the important things that comes across through teaching in academic context with students, um, or any or general public about, um, it's like this, it's trying to figure out how we can all kind of work against the way that the technologies have been built in the from in the last, I don't know, like let's say like 10 or so years. Um, because again, everything is built to just for us to be able to consume as much as possible. For even just like one example is the endless scroll that is in kind of a feature of many sites right now, right? And so one of the things that is so
Want to take
thinking,
a
well,
right up here or
oh,
go straight?
oops.
What?
Uh,
Okay.
so I think that one of the things is working with students and work with anyone as they're trying to trying to come up with ways of how that they can be able to manage the information and slow down, and in consuming it, because it's very easy. And I mean, I am just as guilty as this as anyone else, and I've been trying to change my habits. But you can, and this is can be, I can do this on like a newspaper site or a social media feed, where you kind of just like scroll through and get like just the surface level of information. And maybe everything that I see on there is correct and accurate, but I'm only catching just the little whiffs. And that's when I and gives me this illusion to my own self that I actually know what I consumed. And that gets garbled up as we're talking with others, whether that's in person or online. So I think that there's so I think that's just like I think it's important for all of us to like recognize like the immense challenge that each and everyone is up against to be able to successfully navigate our information environments, and to give ourselves and everyone else a little bit of grace when when we stumble, because we all will.
Thank you. Yeah, Elizabeth, you look like you are eager to add to this, and you have some background in, of course, yeah.
Sure. Stacy was speaking to my heart mind there, with the first idea is slow down. Yeah, because that, as important as it is to try and inculcate, to teach our students some information evaluation skills, we're also trying to inculcate this fact checking, this mindset to slow down when interacting with information online, to be more deliberate. We interact with it so superficially, right? We swipe and scroll and accept for search results, when we need this slower mindset to be more deliberate in how we approach online information. We're up against the algorithms that service information and technology. We also need to just understand. I was so appreciative you talked about how much we're up against, because it's so important to understand our innate biases and how difficult that makes it for us to get past those, to be truly critical of the information that we're consuming. We're subject to some very strong cognitive processes that make us believe things that we hear more than once, or things that confirm what we already believed. We're also more prone to social biases. We will believe information that is presented by people in our in groups rather than information that's presented by perhaps experts in the field. So we're up against quite a bit, but slowing down is going to be a key aspect of being able to deal with that, and inculcating this fact checking mindset So it's a skill and it's a disposition that we all need to try to take on. We tell our students that what we're trying to teach them is a durable skill, that it's not just for academia, it's for their lives. Yeah.
Thank you. This leads very naturally, I think, to the next question I had, which is these skills that you mentioned just now, Elizabeth, things like, being aware of confirmation bias or being aware of peer pressure, and all of you have mentioned about slowing down and, not just scrolling superficially. Should those kinds of things be explicitly taught? Is there a need for, formal instruction in information literacy, or are there kinds of informal interactions that we can foster that would accomplish the same sort of thing? Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally we'd have both, right? I mean, I think that I do believe that it's helpful to teach information literacy explicitly. I think that we're trying to help our students think critically and reflect on their own engagement with information, both as consumers and as producers. We want them to be very intentional about the way that they consume and produce information. And I think that it can be helpful to teach that very explicitly. I don't think you can teach it out of context though. Like, I think it really helps to teach it within a particular context. So what we've done here at SOU is we've developed really a suite of library and information science classes that all engage with information literacy in different ways, but through themes, right? So we teach like my Jane Austen class that you mentioned is actually an information literacy class. Because it's really about information creation and information formats and those kinds of things. And we've had other classes that are about biases and information. So students are reading about those kinds of things and thinking critically about their own engagement with information on many different levels. So I do think that it's not magic. You can't just like give someone information literacy skills, but putting it within a context where they can engage with it is really helpful. But I do think those informal interactions can be great too. I mean, I think that, for example, if a student presents themselves at the research help desk and needs to find, research for a paper, that's a great opportunity to kind of walk them through some of the sort of dispositions or approaches that you'd like them to have, and explicitly articulate what exactly is happening. What exactly are you finding, and what are the questions you want to ask about the things that you're finding? So I think those informal moments can be great, but I believe that you also need some explicit formal instruction too.
Stacy and Elizabeth, would you like to comment on that?
Okay. Yes, 100% agree. Formal and informal mix is definitely the way to go. And I have a little bit more experience thinking about informal interactions and supports. So I'll speak a little bit more to that. But first of all, I think it's also want to emphasize this is a lifelong, should be a lifelong kind of education for all of us. And so, ideally this starts for kids in
I
elementary
need to go
school.
through Chick-fil-A. Is that okay? No?
You
What
can
do you
pick
want?
me up a sandwich too, please. And through our whole lives. And so and I think that I love what was just talked about, again, thinking like context and and making, and it's very important, yes, to make things relevant to each other. And so the one thing, so I've worked on with some colleagues here at the Information School to create these series of games around kind of information literacy, misinformation, and they're narrative-based games. And there's one game that my colleague made with a bunch of fans of the K-pop group BTS, and they made a game targeted at fandom communities and talking about the ways that bad information can circulate within the online fandom context. So super specific. Like, I look at this game and I interact with it, and it doesn't really connect with me as much, but for others, it totally makes sense. They're making references to like these things that have actually happened within K-pop communities. And that's the type of, again, so if you're if you're a student that's getting this like in the classroom and then getting this in these kind of more fun like informal ways at like a public library, or you're hearing it from your instructors or at the librarian when you're at the reference desk, and everybody's kind of sprinkling it in everywhere, like it's going to start clicking more when you encounter it on your own later on. And hopefully, again, like if they're also then after they leave, they graduate, they're continuing to get that elsewhere, and then they're also then sharing it with others as well. So again, hope it's building some good foundation for kind of a lifelong of growth and learning.
Yeah, for my grant project, I had to train up a cadre of undergrads that I deployed in the community as kind of educational and social media influencers and educational ambassadors. And we used one of your games. They're freely available. All you can go look at it's the Center for an Informed Public, right? Is it? Yeah, at UW. And we used one of those games and we played it at Boise Public Library. We played it at Albertson's Library. And yeah. And so I'm grateful to those, because you're right. These informal as well as more formal. More formally, we have a micro course called the Research and Critical Inquiry micro course that's pretty much required of every undergrad student. And it's got a component in there for information evaluation. We use a particular methodology called lateral reading, which has been developed by researchers at Stanford. And it actually uses a fact checkers technique. You don't stay on a web page to find out what's going on with it. You want the context surrounding the information. So you look at other places to see what their affiliations, their associations, their fundings, their scientific reputation. And Wikipedia can be your best friend with those endeavors. I know there's some people that are still saying, "Oh, Wikipedia." Wikipedia is actually a very useful tool for the first round of fact checking. If you, for example, we use the Institute for Energy Research as a resource from them for students to fact check. And if you go to the Wikipedia page for the Institute for Energy Research, you quickly learn that it's a front for the fossil fuel industry, funded quite a bit by the Koch brothers, who own Exxon. So this idea of getting outside perspectives is a really important methodology for fact checking. And it takes some critical thinking. We find that maybe a third of our students cannot get through it the first time around. We have to be more deliberate. So it's not easy. It's a habit, and it's something we've got to keep doing all our life. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in those concrete examples. And yeah, maybe Stacy and Melissa would like to mention, just because we were talking sort of abstractly about the need for information literacy, if you also have some concrete examples to share of how critical thinking skills might be applied in that context. Might be interesting for us to hear about that.
Sure, yeah. So one of the courses that I designed for our little, like I said, our suite of information literacy courses was about science and information, and I called it Science, Information, and Society. And so the idea was that this was really geared towards like freshmen, first year students who don't have a lot of these skills already, are coming in without a lot of experience doing research. And a lot of the readings for the class were newspaper articles. So things like New York Times or Atlantic or all different kinds of things that we would find on the internet that were about science topics. So their job was to really learn how to read these articles and ask questions like, well, they're saying a study, this is a results of a study. Well, where was that study done? Who was involved? What did it look like? Those kinds of things. And I actually had an exercise one day that I called it, I can't remember, I called it like the library scavenger hunt or something like that. But it was just like a worksheet they had to do where they had all these different articles and they had to find information in the article, or if it wasn't in the article, go outside of the article and do that lateral reading and figure out like, well, who actually wrote this? Who did this study? And the students, when they were doing it in class, I mean, gosh, they could not have complained more. They were like, oh my God, like, like, I don't know how to find this thing. And so, I'm going around and giving them clues like, oh, well, maybe you might try this, maybe you might try that. And they were just like, oh man, this is such a pain. Like, this is taking so long. Like, I mean, the whole time they were just belly aching the whole time for the whole class. But at the end of the class, I asked them about, what were the things that you learned a lot from in this class? What were the most useful things we did? And half of them, or more than half of them, said that particular assignment, they learned the most from that. From actually having to go through those articles and find pieces of information, or even better, go outside of the article and actually figure out like who did the study, who were the people involved, when was it done, and is this what the study actually said happened? Were the results what the article said, and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, it was a pain. It was painful for all of us to go through that, but they really did learn from being forced to do that.
Thanks for that. Stacy, would you like to add something along those lines?
Sure. Yeah, and just co-sign with everything that's been said so far. And yeah, this that's I think with lateral reading and which is kind of what we're all kind of we're talking about here, kind of going outside of that source. And I just want to emphasize that it's very different than how that it was kind of information literacy or evaluating a web pages used to be taught. And it was used to be taught where it's kind of more vertical reading, where you stay on the site or you stay within this. But really the way that the internet has evolved using kind of, like using Wikipedia is a great thing as a first way. But you have to go outside the page because it's very easy. It's much easier to kind of deceive people. And so those old tricks need some supplement to it. A type of method of lateral reading that we really like at UW iSchool is the acronym is called SIFT. And one of the things that I really like is that this first step, the S stands for stop. And so again, it kind of, emphasizes what we've been talking about slowing down. And one of the things that we also talk about a bunch within our research groups is really the emotion that is involved in information and in misinformation. And that, so if you're seeing some information and you're having a strong emotional reaction to it, kind of the first thing to do is stop and like even recognize like what emotion am I feeling? And like what is this piece of information, what emotion is it trying to evoke in me? And kind of what is it trying to get me to do, to take action about? And it could be like, it's trying, and this is how online information works. You get fundraisers from nonprofits, they use email like headlines that are very emotional, and a lot of news articles use them. But again, it's like a little check, because a lot of times misinformation, disinformation online is trying to evoke that a reaction, trying to speak to something that is connected to something that you're kind of a core part of your identity or beliefs, and that overrides all those critical thinking like skills and abilities that you have. And so by stopping, again, this part of slowing down, but also stopping and kind of recognizing like, oh, I'm feeling something right now, it kind of gives you a little bit more of a chance to be like to be able to then have those critical thinking skills kick in. So I think that's also something that is that we talk a lot about, that it's you have to think about those critical thinking skills kind of in the context of the information environment, and that it takes a little bit more of an effort to kind of turn those on, even for people who are very skilled at it.
Yeah, in an environment where we get a torrent of information more than ever before, that seems like valuable advice. Elizabeth, did you want to add something to that?
Well, I just wanted to add a little more about the more casual way of interacting with folks, and particularly in relation to interacting with folks. I'm so glad you mentioned identity and ego, because our beliefs are very tied up in our identity. So when you're trying to engage with somebody who's very invested in believing something that is demonstrably false, misleading, or maybe even hurtful to themselves or their community, it can be a hard thing to do, because we cannot confront people with the truth. Here's the facts. That is never going to work. Where we usually dig our heels in more when we're confronted with, I know better than what you're saying. So it's really hard for me to walk the talk, but we, as mentioned before, we have to approach each other with curiosity and with grace. We have to really engage with people to understand. And sometimes, according to some researchers, that in having to explain ourselves, it can open a little crack in our belief when we can perhaps maybe begin to change our own minds. We are not going to change others' minds, but by asking questions, to be genuinely curious, those questions can perhaps spark somebody's self-reflection and help them see that, oh, maybe what I'm saying is my truth is really not actually me. So it's really hard to do. I think his name is David Rainey, How Minds Change. It's a wonderful book that talks about how in California, when the proposition first went through for gay marriage and it got voted down, the folks that were in support of that were dumbfounded because they'd done extensive polling and thought that they had convinced folks that this was the way to go. So they strategized a little bit differently. And when they went out and were knocking on doors, they asked people to explain to them what their beliefs were in relation to gay marriage. And next time the proposition went through, and they firmly believe that this approaching each other with curiosity, with wanting to understand each other, can help us maybe cross some of the divides that we've been developing. So.
I'd like to shift slightly to something that has been on everyone's mind probably in the last couple of years, and that is, you know, the new wave of AI tools and techniques that are insinuating themselves into every nook and cranny of our existence, it seems sometimes, or at least some people would like that to happen. Can librarians and other information science faculty aid students and faculty generally in using AI tools productively? How do critical thinking skills apply to using AI tools productively and to other aspects of information literacy? Anybody who wants to chime in on that?
Well, librarians have developed an AI course that includes lateral reading because we find that that's an essential skill to use there to determine if the things that AI is sharing with you are actually real. We've had some issues with faculty and students coming to us with citations to find articles that were hallucinated, made up by AI. So we find that this fact checking can be one tool for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's a little bit hard to talk about AI because whatever we say here tonight will probably be different tomorrow. We are trying to actively engage with AI in a lot of different ways, and particularly in classes, I've been talking with students a lot about what AI can do and what it can't do, and about those hallucinations and things like that. What are the things that's actually good at? You know, it's pretty good at generating lists of keywords, you know, and there are things you can use it for. It's terrible at generating citations for you. It's terrible at doing research for you. You know, I would argue that it's you know, dubious quality when you ask it to summarize things for you. We are trying to see if there's ways to engage with it, but I think that is sort of what Beth was kind of getting at a little bit is one of the most important things is to be critical about it, right? Don't just assume that what you're getting is authoritative. It kind of feels authoritative, right? I mean, the tone it takes when it talks to you sounds very authoritative, and students tend to just sort of take it at face value as accurate, but they need to learn that this is an information source like many others that you need to be critical about. you need to think about. You need to use those lateral reading skills and look at other ways of verifying the information you're getting. I think it's also, for me, it's been helpful so far to really talk to students a lot about how AI is actually generating the information. Because I actually think that that's something that's important with all of our sort of information resources that we use, is thinking about how is this produced? So that way you can kind of say like, well, where might bias be introduced into that process? You know, whether it's like a scientific article in Nature, or whether it's a bunch of stuff generated by an AI tool, thinking about how that information came to be and where bias might be introduced, where inaccuracies could be incorporated into the information that's getting produced. I think that's actually really helpful when you're talking about AI content as much as it is about, you know, a news story or something like that.
I would
Stacey.
think the only thing I really have to add, I think, is that it's just the emphasizing the importance of engaging students in these conversations. And it's just that's critically important, and to have and encourage reflection on these tools, because we cannot pretend like they do not exist. Students are well aware that they exist, and if we're not engaging with them in these conversations and helping guide them to the best of our ability, and I think there's some bit of honesty there of, we can be honest with like, look, this is changing all the time, and we are also learning and figuring this out too. Then so I think it's very important, so we can make sure that they are continue to come with us, that they're starting to think about these things, because otherwise the tools will just get used without perhaps anyone kind of introducing some of those critical aspects to it, and they will just continue to use them.
Yeah, I'll chime in with an opinion of my own here, which is that there are many, many different kinds of AI tools and many different potential uses for them. And for instance, when you use a chatbot like ChatGPT or Gemini, it doesn't cite sources, it hallucinates like crazy. And that was my very first experience with ChatGPT, was watching it hallucinate and having enough background to say, hey, wait a minute, I'm going to fact check this. Now there are others that, like Perplexity comes to mind, that actually do provide citations, and perhaps they're more reliable in their answers, but they probably have dangers of their own too. So any other reflections you have about potential good and bad uses of these tools might be interesting for everyone here to hear about.
I think one thing that I think is difficult to have conversations about is that because I see lots of students and lots of people seeing these as kind of writing aids, and I think it's there's a little bit of research starting to come out around this, about how using the tools in certain situations can really flatten and kind of take away our critical thinking processes. And I think anyone that's done any writing in any sort of professional capacity knows that good writing is hard, and that writing is also thinking. Like when I think I understand, I think I know, what I think I know something, and then I try to explain it and I realize, oh, maybe actually I don't, maybe I need to think about this a little bit more. And so we want to make sure that students are still engaging with that for their own growth and learning, but then also, again, understanding the limitations of these systems. The other thing I'm also just a little concerned about, as someone that enjoys reading good writing, is just how kind of tepid and boring and sort of kind of just not good, the writing outputs. Like, it's good enough to kind of make it seem like good writing, but you lose people's voice in the AI often, and I enjoy reading people's own words much more than anything that the kind of what gets the most of the outputs that I see from AI tools. And maybe that'll get better over time, but I do think that there's something, a flattening a little effect from those tools.
Elizabeth, would you like to add to that?
I just appreciate so much what is being said here because it's confirming my own experience. Starting in summer 2023, that lateral reading exercise, the students have to do some writing. They have to evaluate the piece and write a few sentences. And we noticed, starting about summer 2023, certain phrases that they would write answers to two other questions, and then all of a sudden the tone and tenor and word use would change in the actual evaluation piece. So they were feeding, and we realized pretty quickly, they were feeding stuff into ChatGPT and then just cutting and pasting. And there was absolutely a similarity in the words used and the way it was structured. So we developed a system with the primary instructor and the dean of students so that we can engage in conversations about the appropriate use of this. And the fact that it was so prevalent leads me to think that many teachers are unable to cope with it, or unable or unwilling. So it's really important for us to maybe be reevaluating our writing curriculum and having more in-class writing so that students can develop their own voice, their own skills, and maybe not feel like they have to use AI just to get something written that is good enough. That's a piece that I just read today that talked about in-class writing, maybe one way that we can get past the tendency to use ChatGPT to write stuff up for.
Want to add anything at this point?
I don't know if this is helpful or not, but I found that, I mean, it's had like a weird effect on me personally, and that when I get something from a student that is full of like weird student thoughts or bad word choice, and I'm like, this is authentic, right? Like in my Jane Austen course, I had a couple students who I strongly suspected were using ChatGPT for all the things you said, right? Like this kind of flat, like B- level, not great thinking, but not also horrible either. And then I turned to another one, and the student's like, Mr. Darcy is so stuck up. This a student of this. This is freshman thinking, and that's okay. Like, that's where they're at. I want them to engage with that. Okay, tell me more, right? Why do you think that? And, you know, is there anything in the text that contradicts that, you know, those kinds of things. But I mean, it's weird, right? Like trying to get students to cultivate their own voice, and when it's so tempting to use the tool. I was using AI to brainstorm keywords and things like that in the class as part of a pilot project. And I had a student who said that he didn't want to use it because once he uses it, he can't think anymore. Because it seems like the thing that it's telling him is better than whatever he can think of. And so it like kind of stops him from thinking on his own. And I thought, yeah, that's definitely a danger that's out there.
Thanks. I'd like to shift a little bit to a slightly different topic, but I'll just add that this problem of stock phrases and wording showing up is not confined to student writing. There have been studies of the corpus of scientific papers that show an uptick in certain words, delve and tapestry, and that are probably suggestive of these kinds of large language models being used in writing of scientific papers too. And that actually leads to my next question, which is, how do librarians and your institutions deal with policies, formulating policies about, say, what you acquire as resources in your library, and how you ascertain whether it's trustworthy or not? Do you have policies regarding disinformation pertaining, for instance, to the resources the library acquires, or whether you should alert users when without them asking you to sources that you might deem less than trustworthy. You know, what kinds of other dilemmas have you perhaps encountered along those lines too? Elizabeth or Stacy, do you want to tackle that?
You know, I think this, I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. This is not something I'm as directly involved in. I will have to say, for one, as a researcher myself, I use a tool called Zotero, which I can save articles and help. I mean, the big nice thing is that like it makes the site, you know, putting citations and stuff easy, but it's also as a story. Anyway, I actually got a notification from them from one of the articles that I had saved and said that it had been retracted. It's not actually one I used in a paper, thank goodness, but it's one that I saved. And so I thought that that was a really amazing kind of a way of using this kind of method that Zotero has to be able to kind of help, you know, remove some of that, at least some of the bad academic work that kind of gets out there. But I'll pass it on to someone else.
I didn't realize Zotero did that. I'm going to let my colleagues know and check and see if the other citation managers have that feature as well. It's really hard to ferret that stuff out unless we have a tool like that that lets us know, because especially in online information, we're forced to buy information in packages. So we get, yeah, we don't really have a say in, oh, we don't want to buy from this journal because it's identified as predatory, or yeah, we can kick up a fuss, but we kind of get what we get. Something I've done in relation to Google Scholar, which as a social scientist was always like my first go-to for research, is anymore I do a caveat when I'm teaching students and show them Google Scholar. I let them know that recent research, I think it was from Kennedy School, identified that there are AI generated papers there in Google Scholar, and they're usually less likely to be peer reviewed papers, more like white papers or theses, things like that. And they tend to be more on controversial topics like immigration, vaccinations, climate change. So yeah, it's everywhere. We got to be on our toes in any information space.
So Beth brought up one of the things that's certainly a challenge for librarians, that, you know, when we're talking about books that we buy for the collection, we have, you know, we all research what we buy pretty carefully, and it's part of our mission to provide high quality information resources to our students to support their research in the curriculum. So that for book buying, that's something that's fairly straightforward, and we wouldn't buy anything that, it's not like a public library where you feel this, they feel often there's a pressure to have both sides of the issue, and you know, those kinds of things. We don't do that. We're buying things that are high quality and support the things that are taught here. But those journal articles and the journal packages, we don't get to pick and choose what's in those. So there could be a lot of things that aren't as good. So I mean, we buy the whole package, and then we teach students to ask those questions about the things that we're providing to them, even if, you know, even if they're getting it from the library, they still need to use their critical thinking skills and evaluation skills. But as far as like policies from the institution, I mean, I don't think we have any policies about that directly. It's just we're always trying to find, you know, the best stuff.
I'll ask one more question, and I'd like to leave some time for audience questions to our panel. So this issue about whether institutions have policies about what kinds of information to acquire, or whether to label certain kinds of information as being more or less trustworthy, leads me to this. You know, where are we headed? Could we end up with institutions imposing policies that are perhaps not to our liking, labeling things in certain ways that create problems for, you know, freedom of thought and research in academia? And so where do you see issues of information and disinformation heading in the next few years, both in academia and in society in a broader sense? Anybody?
Well, I think our students are catching on. I think they are. As I'm talking to them, they're like, well, it's a given. I'm gonna check on this. But for me, it's about crossing the divides that disinformation has reinforced. Um, I think I think the ability to communicate with each other across difference is going to be just as important as information evaluation skills. Um, but it's hard for me to really see the future in the chaotic era that we're living. Um, I know that right now, lawsuits are one of the big tools that are being used to try and shut down disinformation. One of Stacy's colleagues, Kate Starbird, has been the target of some such lawsuits. FOIA requests are also being used. I had one at my institution to try and shut down my research. It was from a self-styled news organization, and they wanted a copy of every single document that was ever created in line with the project. Fortunately, we have a really good general counsel, and they understood the law surrounding that and said, well, for that, you're going to have to pay this much money. And so they backed off from that. I have deliberately created openly accessible resources that are nonpartisan to try and avoid that. But when you're trying to help people find the truth, there are some folks that are going to find that dangerous and try and shut it down. We just can't give up the fight for academic freedom. You know, we just can't give it up.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, yeah, 100% agree about the, yes, you cannot give up the fight for academic freedom. One of my um a project of mine that I am worked on that is funded by NSF has gotten flagged by Ted Cruz in his search for quote unquote DEI related funding that the National Science Foundation or NSF has supported. And basically they did just the massive keyword search with all of this NSF grants and are and trying to make them and basically trying alleging that these types of projects should not be have gotten or should get extra scrutiny is the way it's being presented now. And I think we're all concerned in the future for around funding for research. And it's a big conversation um, within I think all of higher ed right now around we're not quite sure what's coming down the line. And some research we don't need external funding for and can kind of continue on, but others we really I do a lot of community-based work where and we need external funding to support our partners in the work and ourselves as well. But it's not something that can come totally internally, and often a lot of that funding is federal. And so we want to continue to do our work that we know is important, that we hear from communities that is important, but we are, I think, at this point thinking about how exactly is it going to look in order to continue that. And I think it's still remains to be seen exactly what will happen, but it's definitely something that's weighing on us at the moment for sure.
Yeah, I mean, another issue that's like trending right now is access to information because, for years and years and years, we've been telling our students that a great source of information are these government websites that have all these government reports and have all these statistics and all this data and things that you can access for free. You don't have to always go to one of these subscription-only databases if you want to get access to some really great data and research and reports and things like that. And, overnight that stuff's vanishing. And, there's new things put in place that maybe seem less reliable than the things that were there before. And so that's sort of a very immediate sort of trending issue is how do you handle this when these are resources that we've relied on for a long time? And I have a colleague in criminology and criminal justice that was saying that, overnight, like crime data vanished from FBI websites. And I've done projects with crime data too. And I'm like, wow, that's like an absolutely enormous data set that's super helpful for students studying criminology and criminal justice, but also data and information visualization. And I mean, lots of things. Some of these data sets are so big, they're great for students to use. And overnight, this stuff is going away. So that's certainly, I would say, a sort of trending important issue is access to some of this information.
Okay, lots to think about there, I think. And at this point, I would like to see if there are any questions from the audience, and I'll bring the mic over to the person asking the question so that our Zoom panelists can hear.
This question was for Stacy, I think. Stacy, you mentioned there was an acronym SIFT, and you said S was for stop. I'm curious what the other 3 letters were for.
Yeah, I kind of gave you like a little cliffhanger there. So it's stop, and then the I stands for investigate the source. And then F is to find better coverage. And then T is trace quotes, sources. So find where else they come from. So that is SIFT. And if you search for SIFT lateral reading, I think you'll find some good explainers, or just lateral reading in general. There's a wealth of wonderful online resources around that.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a comment about artificial intelligence. We have a class with about 60 students through Ollie, and we talk current events all the time. So fact checking and information evaluation is continuous. But I view artificial intelligence as a growing threat in its infancy right now, not a novelty. And I view it more as a Pandora's box, truly, than as a hope chest of sorts. But when I hear comments about students using it as a writing aid, to me, that's chilling because it takes away individualism and it takes away, I believe it's almost the enemy of critical thinking. So are there any guardrails being developed at the academic level to stem the flow and the abuse that's soon be here, I think, with artificial intelligence on campus?
Boise State has quite a few professional development opportunities, and they also have a committee that is helping faculty develop policies for their classes, because in some cases faculty want students to use them. I love the class that is having students use ChatGPT to generate citations, and then asking them to go to the library and talk to a librarian and compare what they find there. I love that assignment. So a lot of teachers are finding ways to integrate it in so that students can develop a facility with using it and an understanding of the ethical use of AI. I think that's key, to understand the ethics surrounding AI and information use generally.
Yeah, I think that it is very it differs a lot across faculty, the discipline, but I also, though, there is a pressure because their industry is expecting students to understand and know about AI and how to use it. And so I think it's a push-pull, because there is regardless of maybe what an individual faculty member's feelings are about it, they also want students to be prepared to be able to, succeed in the workforce. To kind of build off another example, a colleague of mine, trying to provide some sort of exposure, but then also again that critical aspect of things was to she simulated an assignment from an employer was to like go and review Glassdoor, which provides reviews of employers, and so the employer says review our Glassdoor and tell me what former employees are saying about the company. And the professor has them do this analysis, qualitative analysis using an AI tool, and then doing it manually, and then comparing like what their findings and how the findings are different and similar across doing this differently. And then also thinking about the trade-offs of like, well, what if, your boss comes and expects this like a quick turnaround, even though that the output will be less and be missing these pieces. And so again, really trying to build up that critical thinking and critical use of it, while also making sure that that students will be able to meet the employer's expectations.
Yeah, I just agree with that, it's already here. We can't avoid it. The students already are using it. It's everywhere. I mean, if you go on Google, you're seeing it. If you go on our library databases, you're seeing it because it's integrated right with our actual platforms, with the research. So the only thing you can do is teach them how to use it ethically and critically. And yeah, I love those kinds of exercises where you see what it does well, what it doesn't do well, what are the pros and the cons? Does it save time? But it's also missing some really important information that would be really helpful to that employer. And I think that's really the only thing you can do is teach them how to use it, very intentionally and critically.
Other questions? Yes.
So I see information as like food for the mind, and with food we have nutrition labeling, and on the subject of rating, labeling, so consumers can be a little bit better informed about their sources. What do you think about the feasibility of some kind of a labeling system similar to nutrition labeling on the nutritional value of the information we're getting? And it would seem like maybe AI could be very useful in that, because if you've got a system that has a very large data set, it can then compare sort of that baseline against a subset, any subset, which is, or how it deviates from the baseline in all kinds of ways. So I would think that AI could actually be very useful in labeling information. So I'd be curious whether you think that's even feasible.
Okay.
I would say probably not, because AI inherits the biases of the data that it's built on. And so with the negative reactions that have come about for efforts to label information on social media as true or false, I don't think it would be well received. I think it would be perhaps liable to bias, and it wouldn't be well received by people generally. Yeah.
Well, I would just agree that I think that, if it's not AI doing it, if you've got people doing it, then it's going to be also prone to bias, and there's going to be a lot of pushback on, well, what makes you the expert, and, that kind of thing. But if you've got AI doing it, yeah, you're introducing that. And you get into this weird mode, right, where there's a lot of content that's generated by AI, and then AI is summarizing and evaluating its own content. I mean, it starts to get pretty weird, right? After a while. So I don't know. I mean, I like the idea of the nutritional labels, because that would be like a quick way for people to kind of have something to check their own thinking against, but I don't know how it would work.
Couple more questions.
So it's been a while since I've been in academia, and I work for a local government agency, and I work with a lot of folks who don't necessarily have a higher education background and haven't really been taught these skills, and they're in a place right now where they're very conflicted about everything that's going on around them, and they don't really know how to evaluate a source for its trustworthiness, and at the same time, they don't really want to put the time in, or they're uncomfortable with how it's challenging what they hold to be true. And so I'm curious what, like, either like a quick like a short, reliable resource that you guys have, or some like words or recommendations of like, if you have a trusted relationship with that person, that you can kind of steer them towards putting these ideas that we're talking about in an academic setting into practice in a way that works for someone where evaluating information isn't their primary purpose in their day.
Okay, fascinating question, I think. Yeah, how do we convey notions of trustworthiness to people who are under pressure and can't spend all day researching reliability of the information they're dealing with?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what you mentioned there is like, if you or someone else, has like a trusted relationship with them, then that's a great first place to start. I think the other thing is that all the things that we've kind of talked about of like, approaching people with curiosity and empathy in this process still like also hold. I also kind of bigger picture as well when you're having conversations with people, that the outcome of the conversation it's very unlikely that they'll be like, oh, I see now, and will like all of a sudden, everything has changed. But what you're hoping for is like a little like nudge, or getting to start thinking about something. And I think that's success. And so it could, and it could be even just like kind of sprinkling it in, like if you're talking to somebody, and just so it's not, instead of it feels like a lesson. I mean, I really think that talking about like the emotion, like talking about emotions, like, and how information is presented and things like that, and like and also is can be a door, but it also is like, sharing your own struggles is also another like door to kind of open as well. And if you can share a time you were tripped up by something because of like this reason and things like that, and then that can help people start thinking about it. I do think that SIFT is when can actually be a pretty quick process. And if of doing it, and it does take a little bit of practice, but I think those are some things that I would suggest. Also, and encourage them to go and build relationships with their public librarians if they don't already, because they are also there doing this work as well in a non-academic context, and may also have resources or other sorts of activities or services programs related to this.
Ditto.
I agree. Wonderful.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. I think, did you have one?
This guy cannot hold on.
Okay. So, yeah.
Hold on.
Sorry, I don't always receive everything. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you. I was just wondering, as many of you work in libraries and archival settings, do you find it any relevance to someone being able to hold something in their hands and see it, how they're receiving information on a piece of paper or a scroll, or with its inherent design, that there's something more concrete and permanent about that. The way and something is received visually is more ephemeral, and so perhaps there might be at least a consciousness that someone's less liable to be deceiving them with something that's it's tangible and concrete. Do you find that that's a relevant factor at all?
I think, oh, go ahead. I think it's just such an interesting question, and just a couple of things is one, I think that just the sheer amount of information in something like that is different. So you have a little bit different environment, or different, not as big of a challenge. But I will also say, like, I mean, the National Enquirer, World News, like we're all, existed in paper as well. So I do think that's my kind of my gut thing, is that it definitely exists in all forms. This has all existed since the beginning of time, just in different formats. But the environment that we live in now is more challenging for sure.
That's a good point about the National Enquirer, the paper, but this is not exactly an answer to your question, but I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day about, she was saying that she wished that we had more audiobooks in the library for students to use. And I love audiobooks, and I am definitely one of those people who says, yes, listening to an audiobook is reading. But for the purpose of like information literacy skills, I do think that video content or audio content is a little bit different, because you don't stop in the same way, right? Like if you're listening to a podcast, you're less likely to stop it and say, wait a minute. Where did that information come from? And like, what was the source that they were drawing on for that? Whereas if you're reading something, it's much easier to kind of stop and ask questions. So I do think there is a difference in the way you're receiving the information and how likely you are to kind of critically engage with it. I do think that seeing a video or listening to a podcast or something else is different in some ways. And I do think we need to maybe think about, are there strategies we could use to help people use some of these same information literacy skills for these other sort of media that they might be getting their information from.
Was there somebody who had a hand up for a long time?
So David Pogue made a career out of interpreting software. Is there anybody like that for AI? Is anybody writing the AI for Idiots book?
Thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question.
Someone named David Pogue made a career of writing books about software, explaining it to people who didn't have an extensive background in it. And is there some equivalent person for AI?
I've heard
Yeah, I would say it's probably too soon to tell, but maybe our panelists have some views on that.
No, the answer's no.
Yeah, it's changing.
But just that it's changing so fast. I mean, I think it's going to be challenging for anybody to write the book on it, because it's changing daily.
Yeah. All right, I think we better wrap up there. We'll just conclude by thanking we're out of time.
I want to thank everybody for
Yeah.
coming, and we
Yes.
hope to see our panel. Next month, March 13th, at the 20th anniversary celebrating.
4:30.
Building
Starts an
renovation.
hour earlier.
Starts an hour earlier, 4:30. There'll be all sorts of snacks and interesting exhibits around the library, so you can see some of the real gems around the library that you may not know about, that you may want to tell people about as well. So thanks for coming, and see you next month.